So when it comes to designing this algorithm, right, it's going to affect many things. Of course, it's going to affect who gets what. What is the fundamental allocation that we get? What are, how well off are particular individuals? What are the peer effects, right? So system-wide efficiency or efficacy of the algorithm that we develop, right? So it affects all types of individual, group, system-wide performance measures. It will also affect how people interact with your algorithm, right? Because I ask you for your preferences of, A over B over C and so forth, doesn't mean that you have to necessarily tell me the truth, right? Maybe you know how my system works and try to manipulate by gaming your preference, right? Instead of truthfully revealing your preference, you tell me something else as your preference that ultimately gets you something that you prefer even more. Okay, so that's the notion of strategizing. Now, of course, I can develop a mechanism such that you cannot benefit from any misreporting. Okay, so that's also, there are many different ways that you might want to design the algorithm. That could be one thing that you want to make a mechanism static. Okay? And lastly, to get to Professor Rande's question, who is content and envious? Right? So I can assign you all to different positions. You all have your preferences over which positions you prefer more or less and so forth. Which likely means that some people are not getting their top choice and are envious of someone else's position. Right? Are you content with what you got, or are you envious of other people's position? And this talk will actually be about thinking about these coalition games when some group of agents can come together and say, we are not happy, we want to try to change the system.
So is it related to Arrow's social choice theorem?
So it will be a mixture of social choice and matching, which I'll clarify again. So please keep interrupting. It's otherwise it's very lonely up here. Okay. So in my work, I've explored different applications of matching theory. As I said, the traditional canonical applications are school choice, assigning kids to schools, residency choice, assigning medical residents to hospitals, and I was thinking of sort of political economy or public administration applications, such as allocation of Indian civil servants to different states, right? All India's civil services are assigned lifelong assignments, more or less, to a particular state or group of states, state governments. This gets to some literature and development, bureaucracy, state capacity, and so forth. There's also another paper I have on assigning US senators, US politicians, to different legislative committees. Now, these are, those of you who are in political science might have studied some of these important allocation problems, but they have actually not been really explored much through the market design lens or matching theory lens. Okay, so this gets to more kind of organizational economics. I'm going to talk about both of these. At the end, I'll talk a lot about this particular application as well. Okay, so again to the question, first question. If you start thinking about these types of allocations, you realize that there's, in fact, a lot of discretion in how to design an institution. Institution being the rules. What my definition of the institution is the matching procedure. Okay. So, in the US Senate, each political party, Republicans and Democrats, have their own procedures for how to assign their members to their positions on the legislative committees. Two separate procedures. It kind of raises a question, why two different ones? When would they change? Right? Is one more stable than the other? And so on and so forth. Same thing with the oil and gas services, right? IS, IPS, forest services. They are assigned lifelong appointments with a very transparent, maybe some of you have taken UPSC exam before, extremely transparent systems which are straight up a matching procedure, right? Lifelong assignments as soon as you qualify to a particular state or group of states, what we call state government. As you see here, the systems have changed over time, right? So at the end, I'll focus after talking about the theory a bit, I'll focus on this particular application, trying to say now we have a lot of data about the matching that's there. We have preference data. And can we come up with a kind of political science, political economy story for why these mechanisms change when they do, as well as why they didn't change when they did not change? Right? So it's this kind of question about evolution, stability of these institutional designs.
So one question. In the context of IAS, let's just stick to IAS, forget about IPS, just IAS, let's say.
Yeah.
I'm told that when you write the entrance exam and when you qualify, then you state your first choice, second choice, third choice. And then they try to accommodate you into the state which is your highest choice. If possible, they give you the first choice, the second choice, and so on. My question to you, and by the way, we do the same thing in Gopi Institute. There's an entrance exam, and there are 6 different or 7 different courses at MSc level. So every student who qualifies and gets admitted gives his or her first choice, second choice, third choice. You may or may not get that, and then so on and so on. So my question to you is, once this assignment is done, is your theory also looking at, suppose I identify somebody else and say, hey, by the way, do you want to swap with me? Bilaterally, you and I will just swap, and both of us will be happy. So do you allow for that deviation post everything?
Sure. So very good question. The matching procedures are a lot more complex than that. So I'll get to that. And they depend on the fine details of exactly how you run these and design
So
systems.
you let those possibilities also be there. That post assignment incentive to bilaterally swap or do something like that.
That's right. So I actually have a separate paper on thinking about designing and improving. So looking at particular change in procedures, trying to empirically back out what's the effect of this type of mechanism on assignments and ultimately on development outcomes, and thinking about how to improve mechanisms overall. Right. What I'm going to focus on here is thinking about when enough members of IAS, IPS, Forest Service try to pressure to change the system in their favor, or when that pressure can be resisted by, in this case, a strong PM, and so on and so forth. But exactly as you were pointing out, those types of issues are what a good market designer will try to incorporate in the algorithm, right? To ensure that the two of you sitting there don't have an obvious NP for each other's position. So the approach I'm taking is kind of well put by Douglas North, his famous book, that institutions are created by human beings, they evolve and are altered by human beings. Right? So oftentimes in economics, our empirical strategies do what? We take the institutional design as fixed, right? Some exogenous variation and so on and so forth, and we try to use that to back out some nice statistical estimates or something, right? Market design, of course, takes the view that we can design these types of procedures, like the institutions, and I am taking the view that these procedures can be evolving over time based on different pressures of who is wanting to change the procedures in what manner. Okay, so the idea being that these rules and procedures are agreed upon, they rely on the support of the very members who are being assigned in these types of applications. Right? Which means there's a lot of scope, exactly as Dr. Anand said, for different coalitions to mobilize and attempt to change the system in their favor. Okay? So this is what I'm calling institutional choice in this setting, which is choice over how you design the assignment procedure, that black box, that matching method. Okay? So the question is straightforward. When will you get a dominating coalition of members, within an organization who can successfully mobilize and undermine or reform the organization's assignment procedures by which their members are assigned to positions? Okay. You can think about something as trivial as office allocation in the Gokhale Institute, all the way to IAS allocation, to senators allocation in different legislatures and so on.
Okay, office space allocation very complex. Don't make it sound as beautiful.
So these are hard problems. So exactly as someone pointed out, right? This is, in fact, to answer these types of questions, you need to combine social choice, which you folks may be aware of, with matching, right? So, as I mentioned, the assignment procedure by which people are assigned to different positions, that is determined by a matching mechanism. Clearly, this is matching theory. Where does social choice come into play? Social choice we usually think of as some sort of formal system to analyze how groups collectively come to agreement, right? And we have social choice over some option, A, B, and C, and so forth. This particular paper is a subcase of social choice because I'm focusing on environments where different people are in different positions. Right? It's a vector of assignments. The social choice of matching mechanisms gives a matching, which is a different position to different people in the room. Okay, so it's actually a subcase of the general social choice problem, but I think one that's quite intricate because of how complex preferences can be over who gets what and who wants what. Okay, so here's where there'll be a little bit of theory. I'll try to just give you some key intuitions. Of course, if you have more questions, I'm happy to elaborate further. But think about a very simple setting. N people and agents being assigned to N positions within some organization. Okay? Matching is 1-to-1. That means each position is assigned to one person and each person is assigned to only one position. Let me start with a very strong assumption, which I'll relax later, that an agent has a complete and strict preference over the seat that he or she is being assigned. Okay? So my assumption is I don't care about other people's assignments. I only care about what the heck I'm getting. Yeah, I'm going to relax this in a big way later on. Hence, across different matchings, different assignments of people's positions, I will have a preference, right? Depending on what I'm getting across these different matchings. If I'm getting, so with my assumption, if I'm getting the same position in both matchings, I'm exactly different. I don't care. If I get a better position than this one, I prefer this matching to that. Okay? And the idea of this kind of, the theoretical results have a voting rule that determines the social aggregation of preferences. Right? All of us as a group, who has how much power and what voting rule and so forth, determines what is the social allocation choice. Okay, so the idea is it's a very flexible concept. You can look at different voting rules here. You can have majority rule, you can have unanimity rule, and so on and so forth. Okay? Maximum number of math which will be on the slide. But all of you know about Pareto efficiency. Right? Pareto efficiency is exactly mapping into this system. A matching M is Pareto efficient as long as there is no other matching M prime such that no one is worse off while some people are strictly better off. Right? Basically, this is unanimity rule, where these indifferent types are abstaining. Okay, so I've just taken this concept that we know, Pareto efficiency, recast it in terms of a voting rule over matchings. Right? Going from matching M to M prime, there should be no such M prime that everyone who changes is strictly better off, and no one is made worse off. You can even think about weak Pareto efficiency, where there should be no M prime such that every single person is made strictly better off. Right? This is like you have really screwed up, right? That every single one of you prefers something else and we can make it happen. Okay? In computer science, there's actually kind of an abstract literature called popular matching. That looks at what? It tries to find a matching M such that there is no M prime, such that the number of people who strictly prefer M prime to M are more than the number of people who prefer M to M prime. Strictly. Okay, so it's a notion of sizes of sets of people who prefer one to the other. So this is basically the notion of a conversating net. Looking at all the possible matchings that are there, which is a large space, right? N factorial space. You will not have any other matching such that the number of people who prefer that matching strictly are more than the number of people who prefer this matching. What I'm adding and I think driven by application as well, is the notion of majority rule. Okay, so oftentimes in applications, there's some majority or supermajority rules by which we make decisions, right? So I'm interested in this notion of institutional stability, what I call majority stable. There should be no other matching M prime such that a majority of people strictly prefer that to this matching. Okay. Good. So we've gotten past the notation and so forth. You can see if you look at fix a set of preferences for who wants what, right? Ordered lists of this is my first choice, second choice, third choice. And think about the relation between these concepts that I just told you. What you will find, weak Pareto efficiency is a big set, right? It's kind of the obvious set that not everyone should be made better off. You will find that popular matching, comparing the sizes of the sets, is contained in both majority stable as well as Pareto efficiency set of allocations. But these two don't have full overlap. Okay. So this is just coming straight from the definitions. But just to give you a sense of these different voting rules and what they mean. Okay. So I want to emphasize 3, maybe 2, depending on time, takeaways from the theory parts of some of the papers that I have. First thing to emphasize is the more correlated people's preferences are over positions, the more envy there is over each other's positions. And the more envy there is, the more people you can mobilize in a coalition to try to overturn the system. Okay, so let me unpack that a little bit. So it's easy to work in extremes. Okay? One extreme, every single person has exactly the same preference over position. So what is this? We'll have some diagrams like this. These are agents 1, 2, and 3. And their preferences over positions A, B, and C. Right? So one prefers A to B and B over C and so forth. So on the left-hand side, we all have the same exact preference. Everybody wants to be king, followed by prince, followed by whatever else. Okay? Depending on application, everyone wants to be CEO, followed by CFO, vice chancellor, followed by this and that. Yeah. You can take your favorite pick. On the right, preferences are fully uncorrelated. Each person wants different things. Those of you who have studied social choice, you remember this from the Condorcet side. Yeah? So, my setting is slightly different from social choice, right? Each person is getting a different object, different seat. On the left-hand side, when we all want different things, life is quite easy. We can all, I can give each person their top choice, as highlighted in blue. 1 gets A, 2 gets B, 3 gets C. Everybody's happy, nobody's envious of anybody else. This is going to be stable. Kind of more or less regardless of whatever rule you use, right? At least whatever reasonable rule you use. On the left-hand side, stability is out the window, more or less. Why? No matter how you make the assignment, let's say you give 1A, 2B, and 3C, you can always move 2 people at the expense of 1, right? It's sort of like a crown prince reward. You get rid of the king who's in A, you make the prince have position A, he's better off. Make the third person have position B, he's better off. Of course, this generalizes to any n, right? You can always make n minus 1 people better off, regardless of how you make what allocation you have. As long as preferences are fully correlated. Okay? Of course, the fun parts are these objects in between, right, which we get here. Okay, so the more correlated preferences are, at least as shown in the extreme cases, as you get towards the left-hand side, it's harder and harder to get stability because there's a lot of envy. Everybody's envious of people above them, so to say. And that means you can mobilize a big coalition to try to overturn the system in their favor. Okay? I just want to flag that in fact, you can show chaos theorems. Again, those of you who might have seen McElrea's chaos theorem, for example, in social choice. You can construct majority-approved sequences from any assignment to any other assignment if preferences are perfectly correlated. In fact, this proof only requires majority, so you can actually make it even stronger and have not even everybody with the same exact preference, but only some people with preferences. Namely, what is this saying? is saying that this environment can be extremely chaotic, right? As you get fully correlated preferences, it's just a hierarchy. If you allow people to overturn systems in this manner with correlational movements, you are going to face a lot of trouble, and you can in fact not come up with anything that's stable and construct an agenda that goes from any assignment to any other assignment. Okay? So some of the technical stuff I'm happy to chat after the lecture. Okay, so what does this mean in terms of application? Just the basic intuition that correlation in preference is going to undermine stability means we might expect institutional reform when there's a sudden increase in correlation across regions' preferences. Take the example of politicians in the US senators being assigned legislatures, right? Legislative committees, sorry. All of a sudden, if there's one political party that sweeps an entire geographic region, and everybody there is engaging in agriculture and wants to be in the agriculture committee, followed by foreign affairs, followed by this, that means there's a sort of sudden uptick in correlation of preference, right? These are moments where you might expect this type of institutional reform. Okay? That aside, however, if you have dealt with any matching allocation or just by intuition, of course, in any application that you can think about, there is a decent amount of correlation in preferences, right? There's stuff that people all tend to kind of want, some stuff that people all tend to not really kind of want, right? So that exists, right? In the US Senate example, Appropriations Committee, which basically determines the money spent in the legislature, is a committee that everybody wants because it's kind of determining, holding the purse of the entire legislature, right? In the Indian civil service case, underdeveloped areas of the country, conflict zones and so forth, people always tend to avoid. Or places where they don't get much attention or get sort of put down by the heavily controlled and interference by politicians. These are places that these civil service systematically don't want to go to.
So there's true in many areas because we design the institutions keeping the incentives in mind.
Yeah.
And the incentives cannot be equal for each seat. Each position, for example. There has to be hierarchy in the incentives also. So that anyway brings in some correlation in each institution, in each organization.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, you can think about some club where everybody is exactly the same position, there is no president, but these are more extreme examples.
Right.
Even in a student club, you'll have someone who's a chairman or something, right? President. So I think correlation in preference is something that will show up everywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
To differing amounts.
Right.
But even in these applications that I'm studying, it's actually quite strong. So I'll get to some data as well. So then again, next the question, why are we seeing at least some amount of institutional stability, right? Processes are not changing that frequently. So what's happening? That brings me to my second point that I want to make. Okay? That organizations that use majority rules, right? A majority is not better off with some other allocation. They actually are surprisingly robust, even if preferences are correlated. Okay? Of course, this gets made even tighter if you have supermajority rules. But let me give you first a simulation result. Okay, so this is an exhaustive check. What I'm doing is these are simulated preferences for different correlation in preference. Correlation in preference 1 is that extreme example where everybody wants exactly the same thing, right? As you get close to the top, of course, nothing is stable. So this is the fraction of preferences that admit some majority stable allocation. Right? So of course, when you get to fully correlated or almost fully correlated preferences, stability with majority rules out the window. Right? The surprising result is, even for sort of quite correlated preference environments, for example, in the civil services, this the correlation coefficient is roughly 0.5. 75% of the time, you're still getting existence of majority stable allocations. It's quite surprising. I mean, I've worked on the civil services, and this is enough correlation. Firstly, a lot of correlation, and enough correlation to imbalance assignments, right? Which I'll get to. But even with a lot of correlation preference, you still get existence of some majority stable allocations. So what's the intuition here? Okay. Again, I'm happy to talk offline. I show that this is in stark contrast to other rules. Okay, so majority rule is really what's quite distinct here. With this plurality rule, comparing sizes of the sets, remember, the slightest correlation preference and stability is out the window. Okay, so
Even for the lower correlation.
even for the lower correlation,
Do
it
you
is a
have a
little bit.
graph on that?
Sorry,
Do you have a graph on that?
I don't think I have a graph on the slide, but we can chat more.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's actually quite easy to show, but in the interest of time, let's talk afterwards. Okay? So all of these results show that there's heavy restriction on preferences being uncorrelated and so on and so forth for there to exist a stable allocation with regards to plurality. Yet, kind of majority supermajority rules is still giving existence. Okay, so what's happening? And this example I think illustrates a lot. Okay, so these are 5 agents ranking their preferences over 5 positions, A through E. Right? As you see, this is quite correlated. Correlation coefficient of 0.84. First 3 people have exactly the same preference, and other 4 people, 4 and 5, also have similar preferences at the top. But look at this allocation in blue, right? 1 gets A, 2 gets B, and so forth. This is majority stable, this allocation. So we have 5 agents. To mobilize a majority, we need to improve 3. The issue, of course, which you see here is that there's a lot of envy in the system. Everybody's envious of people 1 and 2. But there's a fundamental packing problem, right? You can't put 3 people or more on 2 seats, right? Namely, you can't put 3, 4, and 5 in seats A and B. So you are not able to mobilize any majority coalition in this case, okay? Because of this packing problem is there. This is kind of quite general, right? Think about n positions. You can't put 51% of people in 49% of seats. So roughly speaking, again, the intuition is correlation at the top, right? Everybody wanting to go to the appropriations committee, and so on and so forth. But you can't put everybody in the appropriations committee. Okay? What you need to undermine majority stability is some notion of chain of envy. What do I mean by that? Well, you guys get rid of me, okay, you make me worse off by putting me somewhere else. He takes my position and is better off. You take his position and you are better off. And so on and so forth. You need this chain of envy because otherwise there's a packing problem. Right? You cannot put a majority of agents and a minority of seats.
But for that, everyone's preferences should be same.
No. Preferences don't have to be the same, right? Even here, preferences are not the same.
Right.
But the issue was there were no such chains of envy. Right? It's not that you can get rid of, assign 1 to 2, and this guy takes B, and this guy is happier with C. Right? That was the problem. You only have everybody being envious of 2 positions. It's the same thing, right? 3 people being envious of 2 positions, not good.
Then one agent, we have to completely remove now. Right? Because from A, which is the highest position.
Well, you can give him what's left, right? You can give them, for example, B. You don't have to get rid of them. That's taking the conference referred a bit too seriously. But that's the point, right? So,
situation, somebody is going to be worse.
yeah, I mean, it can be their worst, we can put into D, it can be anything, right? Because there are 5 positions, we start off with a balanced market, right? N positions and N people. So there's always something left, right? But fundamentally, to get a majority strictly better off, you need to give a majority of people new seats. And in order to do that, because of this packing problem, you have to have these chains of entry. You take my position, she takes your position, and so on. Okay? So, in order to get movement with lack of stability with majority rules, you of course need enough envy, right? That's obvious. If no one's envious, then there's no one to move, right? So you need enough envy, sort of enough correlation preference, but you also need to have these chains of envy to address the packing problem, and envy has to be in the right places. Again, this is intuition. What does that mean? Well, well, if you need to change the remedy from my position, if you have to change the remedy, these two can be made better off and these two can be made better off. That's a waste of envy, right? Because you can only have these two or these two. You can't make 4 people better off. So this is kind of some rough intuition for why majority rules, even when there's significant correlation preferences, give you stable allocations in this form where majority cannot be made superior. Yeah.
The word SSR asked, who decides if it's a complete market because you are getting rid of barricades?
So here the idea
Who
is,
decides?
yeah, here the idea is we are collectively deciding, right? So, and we are collectively deciding in such a way that the majority of us don't want to decide on something else. That's the idea.
So, in that situation, what if person number 1, it is backed by a strong union?
So, the start of this, you can have many different notions of institutional stability, which means you can change the voting rule. Right? So you can have weighted rules where, VC has more power over decisions. Full faculty have more power over emeritus faculty, so on and so forth. Right? So you can have weighted rules. These are not the full set of rules. I have a paper where we discuss other voting rules as well. It turns out the key sort of point is, again, rough intuition, one person should not have way too much power. A dictator, of course, they'll make themselves as better off as possible and then screw everybody else, right? So, if one is a dictator, there is no change in the system unless you get rid of the dictator. That's a different story. Okay? Here we have a slightly more, collegial environment. We're thinking about softer rules of that.
Matching mechanism takes into account externality.
So, in the strict setting, right, what I've talked about thus far relies upon you only caring about the position you get. Okay? Let me weaken that right now. So, let's call that individual preference, for the lack of a better name. Okay? I only care about the seat that I get in the match. We can generalize this to what I'm calling selfish but interdependent preference. Okay, so the model I have in mind is basically, I actually have a ranking over where I want to sit in the class. Right? I'm not going to give up my preferred seat to you. I'm not altruistic. But you are my friend, so if I'm sitting here, I would prefer that you sit here. Right? Someone else in the room is my enemy, I don't want to anywhere close. So I can have all types of interdependent preferences, right? I can have allies that I want to make better off, enemies I want to make worse off. I can have coalitions, right? Where you can say, in my coalition, I care about person number 1 more than person number 2, and so on and so forth. As long as I'm not altruistic about giving up a position that I prefer myself. Okay, that's what this preference environment is. If we have something like this, okay, the result is that you only get more majority instability. It's a one-sided chain. Going from selfish preferences, individual preferences to selfish but interdependent preferences only leads to weekly more majority instability. Okay? And the idea is all the kind of punching is done with the individual preferences itself by making that lexicographic, right? That is what's creating the basic level of instability. Anything we add on top of that is just going to get even more complex and mobilize even further networks, further coalitions to undermine majority. Okay? This unidirectional result is also not there for plurality rules, because again, unique to majority rules. Okay, but basically, if you want to keep something in mind, any complication to preferences, as long as I'm not being altruistic, will only lead to weekly more majority instability. So again, what does this mean? Again, to kind of hint at the answer to your question, you have applications where there's correlation preference. As I mentioned, everybody wants their top choice as appropriations committee in the USA. If you were thinking about other rules like plurality rule, in order to get stability, you would have to have everybody's second choice be distinct. That's absurd. You're never going to get that, right? Majority stability says there's still ample scope for stability with majority rule because you can't put everybody in appropriate system. Okay? So in kind of saying there's a lot of systematic correlation in all types of applications, yet you can still get sort of stability of institutional designs, stability of these matching allocations. If you are using majority, maybe even tighter if you're using supermajority. Okay. So I want to skip the next part, but I talk about matching mechanisms, and if you have NB minimizing properties in the mechanisms, you actually get better performance in terms of getting towards majority stability. I'm happy to talk offline about this. Okay, so let me skip this in interest of. I promised I'll talk about some data, so let me do that. Okay. So now we have some notion of, something unique happening with majority rules. You have sort of this matching mechanism at hand. You have preference data. You're thinking about when root systems change over time, and so on and so forth. Let's try to make some progress and try to kind of endogenize institutional change with regards to the All India Service data allocation system. Okay? So again, background, you take the UPSC exam, you qualify by making the top cuts and so on and so forth. At the very start of your career, you assign to a particular state cadre for basically a lifelong assignment. Only way you can change it basically is from match with another IS officer. Totally systematic mechanisms which have changed over time. They're not as simple as different mechanisms used over time. So we want to try to say, can we microfound what's happening here? Just a brief history. I don't think I need to tell it to this crowd, but basically we have some colonial origins of this type of civil service, right? Soon, as the years passed, started getting training of civil servants, civil servant colleges and so forth. Indians were allowed to join civil services. In fact, by the time that we got independence, 60% of civil servants were in fact Indians. It helped justify that we are fully ready for ruling ourselves and so on and so forth. Okay? Again, I don't need to tell this audience, known as the steel frame of India. Vallabhbhai Patel advocated for most strongly for this in his famous speech. Okay? After we had independence, the key objectives that were sort of sustained or added were the following. We wanted to ensure some sort of all India character. Right? Wanted to have something that's not political but permanent tenure. In fact, written in the constitution this way. And we wanted to maintain this meritocratic entry via some civil service exam. Okay? The main jurisdiction that was added in the British times, this was mostly a law and order and revenue collection. We added sort of development angle as well, right, as key objectives of these different civil services. Now let's talk about the institutional structure that's there. As you know, there are many different ministries and departments. 3 different departments fall directly under the Prime Minister's office: Space, Atomic Energy, and Ministry of Personnel. Okay, which houses the DOPD.
I have a question in this context.
Yep.
Indian civil servants, they have a state cadre. But quite a few come to the center. In your analysis, how do you fit it? So suppose I'm in a Bihar cadre or I'm in UP cadre.
Yeah.
Then I come to central government. And I
You're talking about the central deputation, right? Further later on.
The deputation becomes permanent.
Correct.
I don't go
But
back.
that's very later on in the career. So what I'm focusing on,
Even early in the career it happens.
no,
Because it's,
there is something called ADMOT, which is a
whatever my experience is.
yeah.
Additional chief secretary level, they come as secretary, private secretary, and all those things. Because there is a manipulation. As Balu was asking, suppose I have got Bihar cadre. It's just I'm getting from my clarification.
Yeah.
I'm not interested to work in Bihar.
Yeah.
I'm interested to work in Maharashtra.
Yeah.
Okay. So the Maharashtra there is a vacancy. So I manipulate that to something and I can be posted in one. That also happens.
No, you cannot.
That happens.
Well, you can only for some years, but permanently you cannot. Unless you get married to someone in Maharashtra.
So marriage also sometimes does not work. Even marriage also.
That's a different story.
The point what I am making here
Yeah.
is you said that institutional setting is a rule.
Yeah.
The rule making, okay. And the rule is also manipulated rule changes.
So the initial allocation to a state cadre is fully transparent, fully available.
Sometimes.
I care only about that. The initial allocation to a state. It doesn't say anything about how you're transferred or promoted or how you're moved even within the state. That's all outside of the system. The system I'm focusing on is the cadre allocation system. That is there at the very start. Civil servants rank
Then what
26
happens, you
cadres.
are not interested.
Then I'm not. I mean, I'm interested, but I cannot speak to it. So this is not about transfer and promotions. This is about the allocation system that gives them assignment to a particular state at the very start of their careers.
But regarding that, so in the initial allocation of cadres, do these agents, do these, so our, those who are selected and are to be allocated, do they get to form a coalition?
So let me get to it. So there's going to be addition of one player, an important player, which as this diagram starts to hint at is a PM. Okay? It turns out because of these ministries and departments being housed in the PMO, the Prime Minister's office, the PM actually has more or less unilateral control over this allocation system. They do not need parliament to approve anything. They can come up with a thing tomorrow saying allocation system is changed to be this. Okay, so that's a lot of power. And what I'm going to argue with so we go to the 5 right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to argue very, very quickly that this is going to be a struggle between the people who are being allocated, which is sort of my setting, right, at its core, the civil servants, and the PM. Okay. So, since I don't have time, let me tell you two things. The issue at hand is that civil servants' preferences are correlated. They don't want to go to, so these are two preferences of IPS 2008, Forest Service 2015. Average preference rank out of 24 here and 26 cadres here. This, as you see here, Nagaland is ranked 23rd out of 24 on average by all the IPS officers in 2008. Manipur, Tripura, Jammu Kashmir, Assam, and so on and so forth. So the Northeast block, Kashmir region and so forth, systematically, consistently hammered in terms of preferences of bureaucrats over where they want to work. Okay? This causes an issue. What is this issue? If I give too much weight to your preferences as civil servants, we're going to get huge imbalance. All the top talent is going to be put up here. And all the so-called worst talent, and it's very hard to crack the UPSC and so forth, but it's all going to be left over for these cadres. Okay, in fact, I show that this is the case in another paper. It changed in 2008, as you see these black bolded cadres versus other cadres, they were actually operating very much in comparable terms. Pre-mechanism change, system change in 2008, and you see a big divide in the quality of bureaucrats as proxied by their exam rank across these good and bad cadres, for the lack of better term.
So, this talent, is it quantified on the basis of rank they?
Exam rank, that number, yeah. Okay, so to take the theory to the data, what I'm trying to do is say the following. Okay, I have the history of mechanisms. Right? I know exactly the procedure that's used in a fully transparent way over time. So that's a kind of important data set. And I have preference rank data of which civil servant ranks what as their preference. So I can run very crisp counterfactuals. Right? Take the set of civil servants. What would they get if we get them this allocation versus that allocation? Who is MPS, who wants to move, and so on and so forth. Okay? I'm trying to argue that there is a power struggle, basically, if you look at the institutional structure, between the civil service, right? By the way, the civil service is also manning all of the departments and ministries. Civil servants might care about the audit character and so forth, but it's reasonable that they give most weight to their own preferences. They want to make themselves as happy as possible in terms of what they get. If there's any one player who really cares about the spread of talent and equitable development and growth and so forth, I argue it should be the PM. Okay, you are seeing a power struggle between these two. Okay, such that when you have strong prime ministers, how the heck do I proxy that? I'm saying one measure is okay, majority governments. Okay, you moved the systems to prime minister favoring mechanisms, which restrict preferences of civil servants to gain more equitable distribution of talent, more balanced development, balanced growth, and so forth. When you have so-called weak prime ministers, again, how can I quantify that? I'm proxying it by coalition government. The mechanisms change the other way. Bureaucrats, the argument, so roughly speaking, is coalition governments requires the bureaucracy to be on board. So I need to give them something to support me and do the work. What I give them as a weak prime minister is more of their preferences in this mechanism. Short-lived minority governments are kind of lack the power to do much, so nothing really changes. Okay, so again, since I'm out of time, flashing the prime ministers from which this system's changed. Lal Bahadur Shastri at the start, strong majority. We had a system that limited bureaucrats' preferences. I don't have time to talk about the full set, but it was basically alphabetical rosters and basically no preferences from bureaucrats at all. We changed the system with Morarji Desai, again a coalition government. Some system that favored bureaucrats. All of a sudden they had this what's called limited zonal preference. A lot more preferences of bureaucrats were put into account. You get imbalanced assignments. This changed back in again with Indira Gandhi, back again the other way with Manmohan Singh and so forth. Here's a set of all the prime ministers, of course. We don't want to just talk about the changes, we also want to talk about when things didn't change, right? Changes were in red. Based on 16 different PMs and this notion of majority versus coalition governments, you see this kind of, the data seems to line up reasonably with changes in mechanisms one way or the other. Okay, strong mechanisms, strong prime ministers, majority governments moving towards prime minister favoring, and weak coalition governments moving towards bureaucracy favoring. Here's to say that it really matters. Okay, so these are what? This is the standard deviation across all cadres for the average exam rank that's assigned to that cadre. Okay, as you see, this you can ignore the black for now. As you see a graph that goes up and down. When you go from prime minister favoring to civil servants favoring, the standard deviation of average exam ranks goes up. Mainly imbalance in assignment of quality of bureaucrats goes up. It goes back down when you have prime minister favoring system, goes back up and so on. Okay? And exactly the opposite happens with regards to the civil servants preferences. They are getting what they want, more of what they want when it's their favoring systems. And they're getting lower preference, on average their 10th preference, when it's something that doesn't take, some system that doesn't take their preference into account. So you see that these kind of, this up and down is exactly mirrored in these two graphs. One that goes towards what the prime minister wants, one that goes towards what the civil servants want. Okay? And this is kind of where I can say more, right? So this is just with 1 year of IPS. It's work in progress, I'm adding more data. It's probably too small to see. The 122 officers, as I said, I have the preferences. Moreover, from matching theory and what the matching is, I have preferences which are strategy proof, so they're truthful. So I can treat them as true preferences. And I can simulate who would prefer movements for or against these changes in systems, right? Prime minister favoring mechanism on top, bureaucracy favoring mechanism on the bottom. As you see, we have gone on a path that's back and forth between these. As you see, when you go from PM supporting to bureaucracy supporting, like 85 out of 122 of these IPS officers would support. Whereas when you go the other direction, like 24 out of 122 would support. Right? So let me leave you with the last thing, just as something that's interesting. The most recent mechanism is non-strategy proof. The most recent IS, holiday service carrier allocation system, can be manipulated. What is it supposed to do? It is supposed to balance, again, we have strong PM in this case with the majority government, it's supposed to balance quality across these different zones by first forcing people to rank zones and then ranking within zone and then forcing preferences to be in a certain order. Okay? Don't have time to talk about the full details. If people truthfully reported their preferences, you would expect those states like Nagaland, which get ranked very low in everybody's preferences, to benefit, as shown in green. If everybody truthfully ranked their preferences, there would be a bump to the average preference rank of all of these states. Moreover, there would be a decrease to the states that are, everybody prefers to go to or something like that. This is what's happening in practice. Because people are gaming smartly, moreover, there's actually not much difference. If there's a difference, there's a difference in the wrong way. The worst states, in terms of states that people don't want to go to, are getting worse off, and so forth. And this is strategizing in a very true manner. In fact, here is a coaching class, famous Drishti IS, where they're literally telling you how to game this. Okay? So for those who are students and sit in social choice and say, what the hell is this strategy proof and so forth, here's a real, very real instance of people gaming very systematically, and hence as market designers, we want sometimes to design systems to prevent such gaming. Okay, so in other work, I show how you can reach the same intended distribution even without having any non-strategic proof mechanism.
Does that mean that the IS of these officers who have preferences, they are able to game because the designer of the mechanism is also part of is also supporting.
The mechanism is designed, is fixed.
Right.
But it is
one person is having too much power in allocation, right?
No. The rules of the game are fixed.
Yeah.
You go to DOPT or UPSC, you see the exact matching procedure. The matching procedure is designed in such a way such that all the participants can potentially strategize and be made better. They can potentially not tell their true preference for Maharashtra as first choice and so forth, change it up and try to get something they prefer even more. And this is being done in a very systematic way. And in this case, it has very sort of immediate impacts because it's leading to this, right? It's leading to the difference in imbalance actually not being that vast. As you see in these old systems, there's a big change. This is not really a big change. This is the most recent system and second to last.
What is the source of the data collecting the preference?
These are the preferences of IPS, Forest Service,
The source from who you collected these
DOPT.
is available there in product.
Yeah. Okay, so let me end there. So I apologize for going 5 minutes over. What I was trying to sort of illustrate from this talk is oftentimes the choice of this institutional design is endogenous. In lots of our classes, we think of the choice as something fixed and we kind of try to exploit the fixed details for some empirical leverage. But it's actually endogenous, particularly when you have these sort of political economy settings. In these types of applications, the choice is done by the very people who are being assigned. So it raises this kind of social choice and matching question. It's kind of interesting that since you have the preference data, since you have the mechanism, you can actually microfound a lot, right? Usually you don't have the backbone as to why someone got a particular position. That's done behind closed borders. Here you have fully transparent systems. You have the preference data, so you can have this kind of make these arguments with more econometric support, showing in this case power struggle between the executive and the bureaucracy, right? And which way the institution swings depends on kind of the strength of the leader. So that's what I try to argue here, trying to take that matching and social choice results and try to say something about actual evolution of institutional design in practice. Thanks very much.